So, another study update. I've been reading Nicaea and its legacy in a bit more detail. I'm just looking at his thesis, really, and his approach to the Nicene Fathers and Pro Nicenes and all that kind of stuff. What's interesting is how he places them in their kind of intellectual context, and basically points out that all of the Pro Nicenes, Augustine to the Cappadocians, make a number of common presuppositions about God and ontology and things like that. And one of the key themes of their theology is the doctrine of divine simplicity, which kind of limits, or at least is a controlling factor in the way that they use language and analogy, so that their analogies are intended to be limited and acknowledged as such, and reinforced or counteracted by other analogies. There's no perhaps definitive analogy. And one of the things that, for the Trinity, one of the things that Ayres points out is that just because these analogies exist doesn't mean that they thought of the Trinity in a certain way. What we have to do when we look at the Pro-Nicenes is look at how they use those analogies if we're to kind of understand their theology better. So all the things that people like Moltmann and Zizioulas are doing generally kind of rip, I don't want to be too strong, but take those analogies out of context, out of their pro-Nicene context, in this kind of framework of simplicity and inseparable operation and analogy, and then they apply them in the way that they have done, so with emphasis on personhood and perichoresis and things like that. Now, that's not to say that that's misguided, but it is to say that it is perhaps not a particularly accurate exegesis of the Cappadocians or the Pro-Nicenes, because it hasn't paid sufficient attention to their theological framework and their belief in simplicity and the use of analogy, etc. So, when I look at Moltmann's theology, there are certainly exegetical problems in terms of his patristic exegesis. One thing that I think perhaps contributes to this is in the early chapters of the Trinity and the Kingdom. I was looking for it, but I think it's on the shelf. In the early chapters of the Trinity and the Kingdom of God, Moltmann talks about impassibility and rejects that doctrine of God which the Pro-Nicenes accept, this idea of simplicity, immutability, impassibility. Moltmann rejects that, so that those controlling factors that are controlling the discourse of the Pro-Nicenes no longer controls or limits Moltmann's approach to Trinitarian theology. So he can quite happily affirm the usefulness of a certain analogy without being limited by the doctrine of divine simplicity. So I found that difference to be quite interesting and helpful, and it explains why Moltmann's quite happy to kind of just say stuff like that without perhaps thinking it through or being particularly cautious, because he has a certain approach to talk about God. How much I agree with his approach, I don't know. I think the Pro-Nicenes are certainly right to be cautious in our use of language as we try and make sense of God. But I think Moltmann's probably right in emphasising the fact that we can know certain things about God. So God, even though he's incomprehensible, isn't ineffable. And I can see certain problems with the doctrine of divine simplicity as well. But again, I wouldn't want to polarise simplicity and then Moltmann's view, as he seems to do. He kind of creates false dichotomies without exploring any middle ground. So that's one of the interesting things I've found as I've been reading this, Nicaea and its legacy. I went to the library as well recently and picked up a couple of books. I think what I'll do is I'll stop the video now and then go through these books in a separate video.